Nurse Lisa was a fan of thriller movies and true crime documentaries, but as far as danger was concerned, she did not like true danger. She liked it from a distance in the form of movies and documentaries, but she was never one of those people who went chasing after criminals, throwing her panties at them. She thought that she understood the workings of the criminal mind, if not completely then, at least an amateur understanding of the red flags to look for in those with a criminal bent of mind. See, she understood the fact that criminals were not born, they were made. She claimed to have a similar understanding about psychopaths and sociopaths. Although, like many people, she was not entirely immune to paranoia. Sometimes, after watching a particularly gruesome and action-packed movies, she would wonder if the person standing next to her was someone's stalker, or if the doctors she worked under showed any traits of extraordinary charm or narcissism, hiding an underlying depravity. Despite her occasional bouts of paranoia, she took pride in the fact that the criminal masterminds like Bundy, Dahmer, and many others made an extremely small portion of the population, and she also advocated that some of the psychopaths and sociopaths just wanted to live normal lives. Little did she know that none of the arsenal of information that she seemed to possess on criminals and killers would save her in the end. After the graveyard shift was over at the Seattle Gray Hospital in Baltimore, two nurses, Karen and Jenny, trudged in their clothes in a zombie at 7 a.m. in the morning after staying awake the entire night. But they were nurses. They were pretty used to it. Their bodies were tired, but their minds were buzzing with the events of the night they had just had. The ER is one of those departments at the hospital that always tends to be particularly superstitious, and on the days of new moon, the nurses on duty at the graveyard shift always kept espresso shots at hand because they knew what happened when they did not follow this age-old tradition. And the early morning of March 15th, 2023 was just one of those days. As both Karen and Jenny walked out the hospital doors and neared the workers' parking lot, they found something odd. They saw Nurse Lisa's red Chevy Silverado stationed at the parking lot. They found this odd because Nurse Lisa was at the morning shift, and generally people assigned the morning shift tended to come in their own cars. It could be that she had decided to leave her truck at the parking lot and come by cab for the morning shift, but this was unusual for her. In the 2 years that Karen, Jenny, and Lisa had been working together, Lisa always preferred to drive her Chevy when she could, no matter how tired she was. She used to call the truck with the red gloss finish her behemoth baby, which is why Karen decided to call her and find out how she was coming to work and if everything was okay. The phone rang, and then eventually went to voicemail. Jenny thought she heard something, some familiar music coming from the direction of the Chevy, but then it stopped. She told Karen to ring the phone again just in case, and she heard the same vaguely familiar music again. She moved in the direction of the faint music, which, as she moved near to the red Chevy, became clear as Lisa's ringtone, which was the very distinct Highway to Hell by the popular band AC/DC. No wonder she recognized it. She had always been hounding Lisa to leave the 70s behind and fast forward to the 21st century. She called out to Karen to come closer to the Chevy, and recognition dawned on Karen's face as soon as she heard the familiar ringtone. They peeked inside the dark Chevy and could find the phone lighting up with the missed calls. Jenny could feel apprehension building up inside her. Why was Lisa's phone inside the truck? Both Karen and Jenny looked at each other with worry in their eyes. They both pressed against the window to get a closer look and could make out the rough outline of her bag lying inside. Karen was freaking out on the inside now. She felt like something sinister had gone down here. Where was Nurse Lisa if her bag and phone was inside the truck? Jenny tried the handle of the door and it did not open. Jenny mentioned her concerns to Karen about why would her bag and phone be inside her truck and not her. They both decided to call the police immediately to report a missing persons case, although it had been 12 hours and not the requisite 24 hours on the case. When the beat cops showed up in the patrol car, they asked both the requisite questions. One of the questions that came up was could she have gone somewhere with a boyfriend or anyone and just forgetfully left her bag and phone in the truck, to which both replied in the negative, stating that Nurse Lisa was currently single, having sworn off men because of her last breakup. They additionally also explained her passion for true crime documentaries, which led her to be overly cautious. Both Karen and Jenny had never known Lisa to be reckless like that. The police said that they would start at her house and see if they could find any clues from there. As the preliminary search continued, it was found that Lisa had not been home since her shift ended because her neighbors had not seen her and the house was found to be empty. They checked her list of usual haunts and places which they had gotten from Karen and Jenny, but they did not find her there. The focal point of the investigation was the red Chevy after the time limit passed, and Lisa was registered as a missing person. They entered the truck with the help of a lockpick and found that all the belongings, including her wallet, clothes, and keys, were in the bag along with her mobile phone, which was also lying on the seat. Another strange thing that was found out was that the keys of the truck were in the ignition. The whole scene painted a strange picture. It seemed like Nurse Lisa had been just there and her friends had just missed her. Beat cop Matthew felt like he was standing at the correct place. He felt like only the Chevy knew the whole story. He glanced at the back of the truck and saw that a brown tarp covered the space behind. That was nothing out of the ordinary, but it did look like something was lying beneath the tarp. He turned his eyes outward to look for some clues as to what exactly took place at this point. Something about the truck nagged at him. He had his gloves on, so he decided to inspect whatever lay beneath the tarp. He hoped it would give him some idea to make a timeline of where exactly had Nurse Lisa disappeared. The red Chevy Silverado was a truck known for its towing and hauling capabilities, which Lisa would have required as she frequently liked to go camping and fishing. It had ample space in the back to be able to haul plenty of catch, gear, and equipment. Matthew untied the tarp at the ends and carefully unfolded the ends, and as he uncovered the tarp, he would also uncover one of the coldest crime scenes that the city of Baltimore would ever see. There, beneath the tarp, lay a dead body that was turned over on its side. The side of its face caved in, skin bruised and covered with unnatural hues of green and purple. Blood had pooled beneath the body, now congealed and dark, seeping into the truck bed's ridges which had not been visible before because of the tarp that had covered the body. The stench of decay mixed with the sharp, pungent smell of chemicals, something unnatural lingering in the air. Matthew recoiled, his stomach knotting. Only his training as a cop and the experience of looking at dead bodies before was preventing him from heaving his lunch into the bushes on the side. The victim's lips were curled back, teeth bared in an eerie grimace. Foam clung to the corners of the mouth while the eyes, glassy and unseeing, were streaked with red. The veins in the arms and neck stood out, darkened and swollen as if injected with something toxic. A closer look revealed tiny puncture wounds along the forearm, each surrounded by a faint circular discoloration. Matthew pulled back, his mind racing. This was not just a murder, it was a message. The symptoms pointed to a rare and sinister drug. Matthew had seen dead bodies of addicts and victims of overdose. Even meth and heroin addicts did not look like this. The case of the missing nurse had now officially become a dead body. Whether it was a murder remained to be seen. Reports were made, and the investigation now needed to go deeper. The big guns were now called in because it seemed like a drug-related case, and an autopsy needed to be done to find out how much of this was self-inflicted or was the nurse just an experiment to test the newest concoction that the underground drug market has come up with. The autopsy would answer all these questions meanwhile, and Detective Lucas had taken over the investigation now, and the interviewing of anybody who knew Nurse Lisa was underway. Nurses and doctors generally had a trained eye to see the symptoms, so it felt strange that if Nurse Lisa had been a drug addict, that the others could have missed it. But then there were a lot of adults who very skillfully could hide their demons from others. The thing with drug addiction was that the outer signs were hard to miss. There was the sudden weight loss and the changes in appearance. There was also the blood-red eyes and dilated pupils, constant anxiety depending on the kind of drug being used. Karen and Jenny, when questioned about this, refused profusely, stating repeatedly that they had never seen Nurse Lisa use any kind of drugs, even for recreation. She did not like the loss of control associated with it. She also took her role as a nurse very seriously and never even asked for prescription painkillers until it was very much required. When other nurses who worked on the same shift as Lisa were questioned, then answered in a similar context, defending Nurse Lisa. Some of the doctors Lisa frequently worked under were Dr. Robert and Dr. Jensby. And they also said that Nurse Lisa was efficient, hardworking, straightforward with a no-nonsense attitude. When the autopsy came back, it became clear that Lisa had not been a user, her body did not show signs of previous abuse, and the multiple puncture marks were made in the body after death, to mislead people into thinking that she was a user. The coroner's office mentioned that the drug that caused Lisa's death consisted of various doses of sedatives and muscle relaxants, in a proportion that caused her to die in that way. The drug concoction was a volatile and terrifying mix of cyanide, morphine, heroin, castor extract, strychnine, and snake venom. As Detective Lucas stared at this report with his mind racing, it led him to a conclusion that Lisa's death was not just a coincidence. It seemed to indicate someone who either used Nurse Lisa as an experiment or someone who carefully designed a cocktail like that to eliminate her entirely. When her co-workers were asked about any suspicious activity that the nurse might have been involved with or anyone who might have a vendetta against her, they mostly said that they did not know anything about it. However, Karen and Jenny mentioned that Lisa did have a run-in with Dr. Robert over a patient, seemingly a difference of opinion, but they also informed that the issue seemed to have resolved between the two of them. They were both devastated over Lisa's death, but they noticed no major change in her demeanor leading up to the fateful day. Jenny mentioned that she was being her usual cautious self, talking about upgrading her security system, but she did not seem anxious or anything. When Detective Lucas questioned Dr. Robert further, he found him to be charismatic, charming, and affable. When asked about the argument with Lisa, he mentioned that as a nurse, Lisa was well within her rights to question some of his decisions, and sometimes these disagreements happened. The disagreement had been related to a drug dosage given to a patient, but the doctor claimed that it had been resolved between the two of them. Although the detective thought that the doctor was being honest, he decided a deeper investigation was required just to be safe. The detective and his team obtained a warrant to have a look at the security cameras to get a clearer picture, both of what happened inside the hospital and what happened in the parking lot. The parking lot video was examined first. Lucas saw Lisa exit the hospital and moving swiftly across the lot towards the side where nurses and doctors park. She seemed to get inside the truck, and then a seemingly masculine figure in a black cloak, not visible to the camera, goes to her truck, knocks on her window. She comes out, but her expression is not clearly visible, and there seems to be a momentary struggle before she falls, and the figure then carries her and expertly places her under the tarp. Lucas stares amazed at the video, shocked at how fast the execution was. All of this seemed to happen in under less than a minute. There were no witnesses, and before anyone knew it, it was over. As he ran through the footage again, a rough criminal profile started forming in front of him. He knew for certain that this was a deliberate hit, and the killer was a very confident individual who obviously dealt with high-pressure situations daily. There was no hesitation in the movements of the killer. It was as if he had a target, and that target had to be dead no matter what. It was also clear that it was someone who knew Lisa, because when he knocked on Lisa's window, she came out of her truck, although her expressions were not clearly visible, so that could go either way. And it happened in the hospital parking lot when it was time for a shift change, meaning the probability of the killer being from the hospital was higher, because the killer knew exactly what time Lisa would get off from her shift and which vehicle was hers, although this was information that could easily be obtained from any source working with Lisa inside the hospital. This anyhow increased the probability of the killer being from the hospital itself. Why Nurse Lisa? There were so many other nurses who worked at the hospital, and this did not feel like the work of a serial killer, because since the investigation had started, there had been no other dead bodies, and there were no other cases like this one. She did not seem to have any enemies, so how did she end up with such a unique drug cocktail that caused her to die such a gruesome death? He needed to find out who exactly had Lisa made an enemy out of. The drug cocktail ensured that none of the usual drug kingpins were involved, plus Underworld Deaths had a signature, something that was lacking here. Why the special drug cocktail? It felt like the killer was trying to convey something, because no other deaths in the Baltimore had reported any death with such a concoction. Even in the entire state, there weren't any deaths like this one. Detective Lucas mentioned to his fellow cops that this felt personal, planned, and yet cold at the same time. He decided to examine Lisa's belongings in detail in the search of an answer. Nothing of consequence was found at her house or at her locker in the hospital, but when the evidence from the crime scene, her bag from the truck, was examined, Lucas found a flash drive in the bag. Now, when this flash drive was examined, it seemed innocent enough. At first glance, it seemed like there were accounts of which drugs were administered to which patients. Detective Lucas was in a conundrum. Why had Lisa kept this in a flash drive and carried it around with her in her bag? He kept looking through the logs, hoping to see some kind of abnormality, but he couldn't see it. As he was sitting in his office, he called Matthew and asked him to come in. He told him about what he had found in the flash drive, but he couldn't see it. Then Matthew reminded him about the disagreement between Dr. Robert and Lisa about how it was related to a drug dosage. Matthew added that the doctor did not seem shaken up during the interview at all, keeping his calm at all times, to which Lucas retaliated by saying he is a doctor and a surgeon. He is used to keeping his cool in high-pressure situations. But they both eventually agreed that it was worth a deeper investigation into. Why was Lisa carrying these records with her? What had she seen in these that no one else could? He just had to understand what these records were trying to tell him. Detective Lucas spent hours poring over the files from the flash drive, cross-referencing them with hospital records. At first glance, everything seemed routine. Patients receiving prescribed medication, standard dosages, no apparent irregularities. But something nagged at him. Lisa had found something that had led her to be murdered in such a cold and efficient manner, almost brutal in its style. He enlisted the help of a forensic accountant within the department who specialized in uncovering financial fraud. If there was money involved or even drugs, there was a trail, and if there was a trail, someone had left it. It took some time before the anomalies began to surface. Certain patients were consistently prescribed significantly higher doses of pain medication than others with identical conditions. Some had no record of ever receiving these medications, despite being listed. Others were deceased long before their supposed prescriptions had been refilled. This wasn't just a clerical error. It was a carefully designed system of fraud. The drugs were being siphoned off under the guise of legitimate prescriptions. The real kicker came when the forensic team traced financial transactions linked to these prescriptions. The money led back to shell companies, pharmacies that existed only on paper, and one name kept popping up in connection to these companies: Dr. Robert. Lucas felt a chill creep up his spine as the puzzle pieces fell into place. Lisa had stumbled upon something massive. She had discovered a network of illicit drug distribution operating right under the hospital's nose, and Dr. Robert was at the center of it all. The next step was to determine how much Lisa had figured out before her death. Her apartment had already been searched, but Lucas had a gut feeling there was more. He instructed his team to go back and re-examine everything with fresh eyes. This time, they searched beyond the obvious places, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Lucas needed to find evidence, hardcore evidence that would jail her killer for a lifetime to come. His team ransacked the house this time because nothing valuable was found during the preliminary searches, but he needed something concrete as soon as possible. Hidden in the stitched lining of a handbag in her closet, they found a second flash drive. This one was different. It contained notes, Lisa's own thoughts on what she had uncovered. March 5th, patient in room 212 received twice the usual morphine dose. Chart says clerical error. March 7th, cross-checked records, 3 more patients, same issue. March 10th, looked up drug supply orders. Doesn't add up. Where's the missing inventory? March 12th, Dr. Robert changed supplier. But why? Hospital never changed suppliers before. March 14th, found company linked to Robert. Need to report this. But to who? Trust no one. Lisa had known she was in danger. She had tried to be careful, but someone had found out. The security footage had already provided the silhouette of the attacker, but it wasn't enough for an ID. However, one detail stood out: the way the figure moved, confident, methodical, with the precision of someone trained to handle delicate procedures. The posture, the way the figure carried Lisa's body, it matched the demeanor of someone who could deal with very high-pressure situations. Detective Lucas felt it in his bones. This silhouette belonged to Dr. Robert. He was the one who had a disagreement with Nurse Lisa, no one else. And judging by the profile that Lucas had built of the killer, it stood to reason that this person would keep a track of all movements as soon as they became suspicious of anybody. This minor disagreement from Lisa had put a target on her back because now Robert knew who he had to keep an eye on. The final nail in the coffin came from Lisa's phone. The forensics team recovered deleted messages from an encrypted chat app. One of them was particularly damning. "Lisa, I know what you're doing. I have proof. I'm going to report it. Unidentified number. You don't know what you're talking about. Drop it." "Lisa, I won't." "Unidentified number. Then you'll regret it." The number was traced to a burner phone, but GPS data placed it near Dr. Roberts' residence at the time of the exchange. It was enough for a warrant. When the police raided Dr. Roberts' home, they found more than they expected. Hidden in his basement were bottles of stolen prescription drugs, falsified medical records, syringes filled with different kinds of liquids, and another burner phone, one that matched the number from Lisa's messages. Dr. Robert was arrested that evening. During interrogation, he maintained his innocence at first, claiming that the drugs were planted and that he had nothing to do with Lisa's death. He played the charming, suave doctor, thinking himself to be above everyone else the way he had before. Lucas had bought into the whole charming and honest act before. He was not going to buy into it again because the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic report from Lisa's autopsy sealed his fate. The concoction used to kill her was a unique mix of sedatives and muscle relaxants, all of which had been found in Dr. Roberts' private storage at the hospital. Narcissistic tendencies in Robert had led him to believe he would never be found out, and nobody could have traced the drug cocktail to him. He was found out only because Lisa had been smart enough to keep records. As the trial progressed, more details emerged. Dr. Robert had been running a sophisticated drug ring for years, using his authority to manipulate prescription records, divert medications, and sell them on the black market. Lisa had unknowingly uncovered his operation, and once he realized she was asking too many questions openly, he had no choice but to silence her. But his ego had not realized that she had been uncovering evidence silently while he had been plotting her murder. In the end, the court found Dr. Robert guilty of first-degree murder, drug trafficking, and multiple counts of fraud. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lisa had died trying to expose the truth, but in the end, her work ensured that justice was served. The hospital reeled from the scandal, but measures were put in place to prevent such corruption from ever happening again. Karen and Jenny mourned their friend, but they also found solace in the fact that Lisa's determination had brought down a man who had exploited his position for greed. Nobody had even thought that someone like Dr. Robert, who was so widely trusted by everyone, could be involved in something so nefarious, but Lisa saw it. During their disagreement that Karen and Jenny mentioned, the verbal dosage that Robert had told Lisa differed from what he had written in the chart, and it was only by chance that she noticed it. As Detective Lucas closed the case file, he couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for Lisa. She wasn't a detective, she wasn't a cop, but she had seen what others had missed, and she had fought to reveal the truth, even at the cost of her own life. Justice had been served, but at what cost? The case of Nurse Lisa would forever remain a reminder that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones hiding the darkest secrets.